The snow fell like ash, dusting the cracked pavement at the edge of the city where Greg Harlan's bus idled. The final stop was a forgotten place, a single bench under a street lamp that flickered like a dying pulse. Rune sat there, a German shepherd carved from shadow, his amber eyes fixed on the empty road. His breath clouded the air, slow and deliberate, as if he were counting the seconds until something or someone returned. Greg slouched in the driver's seat, watched through the fogged windshield, his hands numb on the wheel. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, even as the wind howled, carrying a chill that seeped into bones and stayed. Greg's chest tightened, not from the cold, but from the weight of that gaze, like a mirror held too close. The night was quiet, but it screamed with waiting. The final stop was a scar on the city's edge, hemmed by shuttered storefronts with boarded windows and graffiti that bled in the snow. The street lamp's buzz was the only sound, its light casting jagged shadows across the asphalt where Rune's form seemed to dissolve into the dark. His ribs pressed against his matted coat, each breath a faint rebellion against the cold. Greg shifted in his seat, the bus's heater rattling like a last gasp. Something moved beyond the stop, a flicker in the alley, too quick to be sure. Rune's ears twitched, his head-low eyes darting to the darkness. The snow thickened, swirling in the headlights like ghosts, and Greg's pulse quickened. The air felt wrong, heavy with a threat neither could name. Rune's stillness wasn't surrender. It was a warning etched in frost. Greg's fingers drummed the steering wheel, a rhythm without music echoing the hollow thump in his chest. 62 years, and what did he have? A thermos of bitter coffee, a pension that wouldn't cover the emptiness and roots that looped like chains. He glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing not his lined face, but the ghost of his daughter's last visit, her eyes accusing, her voice fading into the engine's roar. Why bother the dog out there, Rune? With his unblinking stare, it was like looking into a well deep and dark, pulling at threads Greg had long buried. His breath fogged the glass and he wiped it away, but the blur stayed inside. No one waited for him at home, just shadows and silence. He muttered a curse low and tired, his voice cracking like ice underfoot. The dog's presence gnawed at him, a reminder of all the stops he'd passed without looking back. Greg's hands shook not from the chill, but from the weight of nothing, the numbness that had become his armor now cracking, revealing the raw ache beneath. He leaned his forehead against the wheel, eyes closed, the world shrinking to the bus's dim glow and the dog's quiet vigil outside. Rune's head lifted slowly, his amber eyes locking onto the bus door as if it held a secret. A low whine escaped him, not desperate, but insistent, cutting through the wind like a whisper from the past. Greg paused, hand hovering over the ignition, feeling that gaze like a hook in his gut. Across the street, shrouded in snow, Tina stood motionless, her scarf clutched tight, her eyes on the dog with a flicker of recognition. Greg didn't see her, but the air shifted, charged with an unspoken approach. Rune's tail gave a single hesitant twitch, and Greg's resolve wavered. Just a dog, he thought, but the words rang hollow. Something was coming, not in the storm, but in the silence between them. Greg Harlan hadn't always been a shadow behind the wheel. Decades ago, he was a man with fire in his veins, laughing under summer suns, with a wife who smelled of lavender and a daughter whose giggles echoed like wind chimes. He drove then, too, but it was freedom, not chains, road trips to lakes where the water shimmered like promises. But the job pulled him away, night shifts, swallowing days' excuses, piling like unpaid bills. His wife's voice grew sharp, then silent. The divorce papers arrived like a storm he'd ignored brewing. His daughter, little Ellie, looked at him with eyes that asked why, and he had no answer but the hum of the engine. Now, at 62, the bus was his cage, the roots a map of regrets. He'd missed birthdays, graduations, the quiet moments that glue a life together. Ellie hadn't called in years. Her last letter sat unopened in his glove compartment, its edges frayed like his nerves. Greg's hands, calloused from gripping the wheel, trembled in the quiet hours, memories flashing like headlights in fog. The door slamming, the empty house, the bottle that became his companion. Retirement loomed like a cliff, but what waited below emptiness, vast and cold, mirroring the snow outside. He drove on autopilot, the city lights blurring into streaks of what could have been. The dog at the stop, Rune stirred something, an echo of loyalty he'd squandered. Greg's chest ached, not with pain, but with the hollow where love had withered. He whispered to the dashboard, "What's left?" The answer was silence, thick as the frost on the windows, sealing him in isolation's grip. Greg's days bled into nights, a loop as predictable as the bus's timetable. He rose at dusk in his cramped apartment, the walls yellowed like old teeth, the air stale with solitude. Coffee brewed black and bitter, scalding his throat to feel something, anything beyond the numbness that had settled like dust. He joked with passengers, gruff one-liners about the weather or traffic a shield against their fleeting gazes. Tina, the quiet woman with the scarf, boarded mid-route, her nods polite but probing as if she saw the cracks he hid. Greg avoided her eyes, focusing on the road, the mirrors anything but the void inside. At the depot, he wiped down seats with mechanical precision, the rag a barrier between him and the world. Rune's presence at the final stop had become part of the routine. A shadow, he noted, but dismissed like the ache in his knees. "Just a stray," he muttered, but the words tasted like lies. The numbness was his armor, forged from years of loss, keeping the regret at bay. Yet in the quiet rumble of the engine, doubts crept in, whispers of what if echoing in the empty seats behind him. The apartment waited at shift's end, a tomb of takeout boxes and flickering TV light where sleep came fitful, haunted by dreams he pushed down with dawn's first light. Rune's body told a story, etched in scars hidden beneath his matted black and tan coat that hung like a tattered shroud. His amber eyes, sharp as shards of forgotten glass, held the weight of betrayal, a master who had once been everything, now a ghost in the wind. Years ago, Rune had been the shadow of a man named Elias, a mechanic whose hands smelled of oil and whose voice commanded loyalty with a gentleness Rune craved. They rode buses together, Elias's hand firm on Rune's collar, the world a rhythm of stops and starts. But one night the bus screamed, metal twisting, glass shattering in a crash that swallowed Elias whole. Rune had waited at the wreckage, whimpering, his paws bloodied from digging at debris that wouldn't yield. Abandoned by rescuers who saw only a stray, he wandered the streets, betrayal searing deeper than the cold. Hunger gnawed ribs, protruding like accusations, and survival became his only creed. He dodged kicks from strangers, scavenged scraps from dumpsters that reeked of rot, his growls a shield against the world's cruelty. A scar across his muzzle spoke of a fight with another dog over a bone, his limp from a car that clipped him in the fog. Yet those eyes, piercing, unyielding, searched every passing face for Elias, a vigil unbroken. At the final stop, night after night, Rune sat like a sentinel, the snow crusting his fur, his breath a fog of quiet defiance. He trusted nothing now, his instincts honed to a blade flinch at shadows, bare teeth at approach. But beneath the armor, a flicker remained, a memory of warmth of a hand that didn't strike. Rune's heart battered but beating yearned for redemption in the silence, mirroring the hollow in Greg's chest. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was the world's indifference turning loyalty into a curse. Survival was his chain, pulling him back to that stop where hope and despair danced in the falling snow. In the dim glow of the street lamp, Greg and Rune existed as echoes of each other, two souls adrift in the same storm of loss. Greg's eyes, dulled by years of solitary miles, met Rune's amber gaze across the frosted divide, and in that moment, the parallels sharpened like frost on a blade. Both had been tethered to routines that masked their voids. Greg to his bus routes, endless loops of anonymity. Rune to his vigil at the stop, a ritual born of unwavering fidelity. Greg's isolation was self-imposed walls built from regrets that stacked like unsent letters, while Rune's was thrust upon him, a collar snapped by fate's cruel hand. Yet their emptiness mirrored Greg's apartment, echoed with the absence of laughter, much like Rune's nights rang with the ghost of Elias's whistle. Non-verbal cues bridged their worlds. Greg's hesitant pause before driving away, Rune's slight head tilt, as if recognizing a kindred ache. In flashbacks that haunted Greg's mind, he saw himself pushing away his daughter, much as Rune had been pushed into the shadows after the crash. Their pain was silent, expressed in flinches, Greg's hand tightening on the wheel at a memory, Rune's ears flattening at a distant siren. Slowly recognition dawned, not in words, but in shared stillness, the way Greg lingered longer each night, the way Rune's tail stilled, but didn't tuck in fear. Their healing would be mirrored steps, Greg offering a glance of curiosity, Rune responding with a moment of unguarded watchfulness. In this quiet dance, vulnerability emerged fragile as new ice. Greg's muttered, "Hang in there, boy," lost to the wind, and Rune's eyes softening just a fraction, hinting at the bond waiting to form. Their emptiness wasn't a chasm, but a canvas ready for strokes of mutual presence to paint over the scars. The storm descended like a beast unleashed snow, whipping the city into a frenzy of white chaos. Greg's bus groaned against the wind headlights, piercing the blizzard like desperate eyes. At the final stop, Rune was a blur curled tight against the bench, his body shuddering with each gust that clawed at his fur. The temperature had plummeted frost, etching cruel patterns on the pavement, and Rune's breath came in ragged clouds, his amber eyes dimming under the assault. Greg slammed on the brakes, the bus skidding slightly heart-pounding as he peered through the wiper's frantic swipe. Rune lifted his head, locking gazes with Greg through the glass, a silent plea wrapped in pride, his limbs trembling but unyielding. Inside the bus, Tina clutched her seat, her face paling as she spotted the dog, a gasp escaping her lips like a memory unearthed. The urgency pulsed in the air, thick as the falling snow. Rune's form seemed to fade into the storm, a ghost on the brink. Greg's knuckles whitened on the wheel, the visual shock hitting like a wave, the dog's ribs heaving, the wind howling a dirge. Sensory chaos enveloped them, the metallic tang of snow, the roar of the gale, the dim flicker of the street lamp fighting to stay lit. Tina leaned forward, her voice barely audible over the tempest. "That dog, he's been waiting forever." The moment hung electric as Rune's eyes bored into Greg's, heightening the stakes in the frozen night. Greg's hand hovered over the door lever, the storm's roar drowning his thoughts. But inside, a war raged fiercer than the wind. "What the hell are you doing?" His mind snarled logic, a cold blade. "It's just a dog, a stray that'll bring mess and heartbreak like everything else you've let in." Retirement was close, a quiet exit from the world's demands. Why invite this vulnerability, this risk of attachment that could shatter his numb shell? Fear coiled in his gut memories, flashing his daughter's tear-streaked face as she left the empty house, mocking his solitude. Caring meant pain, meant loss. He'd learned that the hard way, walls built high to keep the ache at bay. Yet Rune's gaze pierced through those amber eyes, not begging, but challenging, stirring a compassion Greg had buried deep. Tina's presence amplified the pull, her eyes on him like a judge, her whisper cutting through, "He'll die out there." Logic screamed to drive on, to leave the dog to fate's mercy, but empathy whispered of shared emptiness, of a chance to mend what was broken. Greg's breath hitched, fingers trembling. The subtle sign from Rune, a faint whine carried on the wind, tipped the scale, shifting his mindset from detachment to a reluctant spark of humanity. The internal storm mirrored the one outside, fear clashing with the raw urge to act. Greg's resolve cracked like the ice under the bus tires, his hand slamming the door lever with a force born of impulse. The hydraulic hiss cut through the storm, the doors folding open to reveal Rune framed in the blizzard snow, clinging to his fur like accusations. "Come on, you mutt." Greg growled, his voice rough but laced with an urgency he couldn't mask. Rune hesitated, body low, eyes flicking between the warm glow inside and the treacherous white outside, a war of instinct playing out in his tense muscles. Then, with a limp that betrayed old wounds, he surged forward, paws slipping on the slick steps, crashing into the aisle with a wet thud. Snow scattered like confetti, melting into puddles that soaked the floor mats, and Rune shook violently, spraying droplets across the seats. Passengers murmured, Tina's eyes wide with a mix of relief and something deeper, her hands twisting her scarf. Greg closed the doors, the bus lurching forward as he gripped the wheel, heart hammering. Rune cowered in the back, panting, his gaze locked on Greg in the mirror. Not gratitude yet, but acknowledgement. The rescue was imperfect. Rune's growl rumbled low when a passenger shifted, and Greg's hands shook, regret flickering already. But it was real, an irreversible step, the bus now carrying more than bodies. It bore the weight of a fragile beginning. With the doors sealed against the storm, Greg's impulsiveness settled into a quiet resolve, his eyes flicking to the mirror where Rune huddled a dark shape amid the empty seats. He rummaged under his seat, pulling out an old jacket stiff with age, tossing it toward the dog with a gruff, "Here, warm up." Rune flinched at the motion, but didn't retreat, nosing the fabric cautiously before burrowing into its folds, his shivering easing into stillness. Tina edged closer, her voice a whisper over the engine's hum. "His name's Rune. He belonged to someone I knew." The words hung heavy with unspoken history, but Greg nodded, offering a water bottle cap filled from his thermos. Rune lapped tentatively, eyes never leaving Greg's face. The act deepened. Greg slowed the bus at stops, ignoring the schedule, giving Rune space to adjust while the dog's posture softened, no longer rigid but watchful. A silent bond threaded through the mess, the jacket's oil stains mixing with Rune's wet fur, the bus reeking of damp dog and coffee. Tina's gaze softened, hinting at shared secrets as Greg murmured, "You're safe now, boy," a promise etched in the air. Rune's tail thumped, once faint but real, marking the irreversible shift from stranger to guardian pity to partnership, the first fragile threads of healing weaving in the storm's aftermath. The apartment door clicked shut behind them, sealing Greg and Rune in a space thick with unfamiliarity, the storm's echo still rattling the windows. Rune slunk to the farthest corner behind a worn armchair that smelled of dust and forgotten meals, his body low and coiled like a spring. Greg moved slowly, shedding his coat with deliberate care, but Rune's amber eyes tracked every motion, a low growl rumbling from his chest, a warning etched in vibration, not volume. The silence stretched, broken only by the heater's asthmatic wheeze and Greg's careful footsteps as he set down a bowl of water, pushing it halfway across the linoleum floor. Rune didn't approach his gaze, guarded ears pinned back in mistrust born of too many betrayals. Greg respected the boundary, sinking into his recliner with a sigh, his own silence a mirror neither initiating, both wrapped in invisible walls. Hours passed in this standoff, Rune's breathing steady but shallow, his body rigid against the wall while Greg stared at the TV's muted glow, thoughts drifting to his own defenses, the way he'd growled at kindness in his youth. Tina's words lingered in his mind, a whisper about Rune's past, but he didn't push. The distance was mutual, a fragile truce in the dim light. Morning light filtered through grimy curtains, casting long shadows that danced like uneasy memories across the floor. Greg noticed the limp first, Rune favoring his left paw, a fresh gash crusted with dirt from the streets, mirroring the invisible scars both carried. Kneeling at a respectful distance, Greg extended a hand, holding a damp cloth, his voice low and steady. "Easy, boy, just gonna clean it." Rune tensed, a whimper escaping as the cloth touched the wound, but he didn't snap, his eyes locking onto Greg's with a vulnerability that echoed Greg's own suppressed grief. The loss of his family, the ache that never healed clean. As the cloth came away stained, Rune's breathing synced with Greg's, a silent acknowledgement of shared frailty. Later, Greg divided his meager breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, placing half in Rune's bowl, sliding it closer but not too close. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds like hesitant fingers illuminating the chipped mug Greg held, steam curling from the coffee like forgotten prayers. As he set it down, his hand slipped the mug, shattering on the floor in a cascade of porcelain shards that echoed like breaking promises. Rune, from his corner, lifted his head sharply, a single bark erupting sharp, not aggressive, but laced with an alertness that pierced the quiet. Greg froze, the sound transporting him back to a night years ago, the slam of his front door as Ellie stormed out, her voice barking accusations he couldn't refute, the crash of a photo frame hitting the ground, splintering their family portrait. The memory flooded him, bitter as the spilled coffee pooling at his feet, his chest tightening with the regret of words unsaid, opportunities shattered. Rune paused, his bark fading into a whine, eyes meeting Greg's not with fear, but with a flicker of understanding, as if the dog too remembered crashes of metal twisting Elias's voice, silenced forever. Greg knelt slowly, gathering the pieces, his fingers brushing a shard that mirrored Rune's scarred paw. Evening settled over the apartment like a soft blanket, the heater's hum a steady heartbeat, chasing away the chill that had clung to them both. Greg rummaged in a drawer, pulling out an old tennis ball, faded to a dull green, its fuzz worn like memories softened by time. He rolled it gently across the floor, not expecting much, but Rune's eyes tracked its amber depths, igniting with a curiosity long dormant. The ball bumped against the wall and Rune pounced awkward at first pause, skidding on the linoleum, but then with a burst of energy that filled the room like sunlight breaking clouds. Greg's lips twitched, a chuckle escaping low and rusty as Rune batted the ball back, tail wagging in tentative arcs. The sound of his own laughter startled Greg, echoing in his mind like a door creaking open after years locked shut. It warmed him from within, melting the ice around his heart. Rune paused, head tilted, then chased again his playful growls, mingling with Greg's growing mirth, the apartment transforming from a tomb to a haven. Sensory details enveloped them. The ball's soft thump, the scent of rubber mixing with the faint dog musk, the warmth radiating from the heater like a promise of safety. Tina arrived unannounced, knocking softly, her face lighting with surprise at the scene. Rune mid-leap, Greg's eyes crinkling in genuine amusement. Night draped the apartment in a hush, the only light a faint glow from a street lamp seeping through the blinds, casting slatted shadows like bars across the floor. Greg sat in his recliner, the weight of the day settling into his bones, his coffee cold in its chipped mug. Rune lay in his corner, a silhouette of coiled tension, but his amber eyes no longer darted with suspicion. They watched Greg with a quiet intensity, like embers holding their heat. The silence was a language now woven from days of shared space of bowls, slid gently across the floor of Greg's voice, softening with each murmured "good boy." Then without warning, Rune rose, his paws silent on the linoleum, and crossed the invisible line between them. Greg froze, breath-catching, as the German shepherd paused, then rested his head on Greg's knee, the weight heavy, warm, deliberate. The contact was electric, a surrender that cracked Greg's defenses wide open, his throat tightened, eyes stinging with tears he hadn't shed in years. Flashbacks flickered, his daughter's small hand in his, now gone, the empty bus routes now filled with Rune's presence. Rune's fur was coarse, but grounding his breath, a steady rhythm against Greg's leg, a silent vow of trust. Tina's knock came softly, her voice hesitant as she stepped inside, her eyes widening at the sight. He was Elias's shadow, she said, voice breaking, always at his side until the crash. The word hung crash, stirring a chill, but Greg's focus stayed on Rune, his hand trembling as it settled on the dog's head, stroking gently. The apartment's peace fractured under the weight of unseen eyes. Rune's rest, once calm beside Greg's chair, grew fitful, his ears twitching at sounds too faint for human hearing, a creak outside a car idling too long in the alley. At night, Greg woke, sweating, dreams of screeching tires and shattering glass clawing at his mind, fragments of a crash he hadn't witnessed but felt through Tina's cryptic warnings. Rune paced now, his hackles rising, a low growl rumbling as he stared at the door, amber eyes catching glints of streetlight like warning signals. The air thickened with tension, the heater's hum no longer soothing but a drone underscoring unease. Greg's hands shook as he poured coffee, the mug's weight heavy with the memory of its shattered twin, his thoughts spiraling. What's out there? Rune's instincts screamed danger, his body rigid, tail low, barking sharply at shadows that danced beyond the window, shapes that could be wind or something worse. Greg's own triggers surfaced. A siren in the distance sent his pulse racing, echoing nights he'd driven past, wrecks, guilt whispering he'd ignored too much. The tension snapped like a frayed wire, the apartment door bursting open as Tina stumbled, in her face ashen scarf unraveling like her composure. "He's here," she gasped, eyes wild, the man who caused the crash, Elias's killer. Rune's reaction was immediate, a ferocious growl ripping from his throat, body launching toward the door, in protective fury, hackles raised like spines of ice. Greg's heart slammed against his ribs, panic flooding as flashbacks assaulted him, the screech of brakes in his dreams now real, mingling with Tina's sobs. "I was on that bus," she confessed, voice shattering. "I saw him tamper with it. Guilt's eaten me alive." Rune barked savagely, paws scraping the floor, his aggression a shield rooted in trauma, eyes blazing with recognition of the scent drifting from outside. Greg shouted, "Get out! This ain't your fight." his voice raw with fear and fury, hands balling into fists as he shoved Tina back, withdrawal hitting like a wave. He couldn't lose this fragile family now. Rune withdrew slightly, circling Greg protectively, but his body trembled, maternal instinct flaring, as if guarding pups long lost. Emotions exploded. Greg's shouts echoed accusations at Tina. Why now? Why drag us in? While she crumpled, tears streaming, revealing Elias's dog had been like a child to him. The room spun with chaos, the metallic tang of fear, the acrid scent of sweat, Rune's growls underscoring the storm. Greg paced, panic clawing his throat, withdrawing into silence as Tina begged forgiveness, her presence a trigger, unleashing buried violence. Rune's eyes met Greg's, a plea amid the fury, both flooded with the past's venom, abuse, betrayal, the crash's shadow looming larger. The door shuddered under a heavy knock. The saboteur's silhouette visible through the peephole, a burly man with eyes like cold steel, his voice booming, "I know the dog's here. Hand him over, old man." Greg's blood ran ice, the confrontation crystallizing in the dim hallway light, Rune's growl escalating to a snarl that vibrated the air. The man Victor Tina whispered, Elias's rival who'd rigged the brakes for revenge, pushed inside his bulk, filling the room like a storm cloud. Recognition hit instantly. Rune's body went rigid, amber eyes flashing with primal rage, lunging forward with teeth-bared claws scraping wood as he snapped at Victor's leg. Greg's control shattered, a shout erupting, "Get the hell out!" as he grabbed a lamp, swinging wildly, the cord yanking free in a spark of chaos. Victor laughed cruelly, shoving Greg back, his fist grazing Rune's flank, drawing a yelp that pierced Greg's soul. Flashbacks merged, the crash's echo in Tina's screams. "He did it for money," her voice breaking as she cowered. The standoff intensified, Victor's hands raised in mock surrender, but his eyes gleamed with threat. That mutt saw too much that night. Greg's heart thundered, lost control, manifesting in trembling limbs, the room a whirlwind of sensory assault, the metallic clang of the lamp hitting floor, the musky scent of fear sweat. Rune's hot breath as he positioned between them. Victor lunged for Rune, grabbing his collar, twisting. Greg exploded forward, tackling him, bodies crashing into furniture in a tangle of grunts and fury. Tina's cries blended with the melee. "Stop, he'll kill you," but the primal drive surged, Greg's fists connecting with Victor's jaw. Rune's jaws clamping on the intruder's sleeve, tearing fabric with a rip that echoed loss. The door slammed shut behind Victor's retreating form, the echo reverberating like a final thunderclap in the wrecked apartment. Greg slumped against the wall. Breath ragged his arm, throbbing from the shallow-cut blood staining his sleeve like a mark of folly. Rune limped to his side, pressing his flank against Greg's leg, but then withdrew slightly, curling in the corner with a low whine, physical separation, a reflex from the chaos, his eyes still alert, body tense. Silence descended, thick and oppressive, broken only by Tina's stifled sobs as she gathered scattered shards of the lamp, her hands shaking. Regret washed over Greg in waves. Why did I let this in? His shouts replayed in his mind, the panic that had driven him to push Tina away, now leaving a hollow ache. Rune's gaze met his across the space amber depths, reflecting shared trauma. A silent promise flickering despite the gap. Greg whispered, "I'm sorry, boy," the words hanging in the air, closing the chapter on Elias's ghost, as Victor's threat lingered like smoke. Tina murmured, "We're in this together now." But Greg nodded mutely, the bond with Rune reaffirming through the quiet. Rune's tail thumping once faintly as he edged closer, the separation melting into closeness. Shadows lengthened in the days following, the apartment a fortress under siege by invisible foes. Rune's ears perked at every creak, his body a taut wire pacing the windows with low growls that set Greg's nerves alight. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, too deliberate, too lingering, and Greg peered through the peephole, seeing nothing but feeling the prick of eyes on his back. Tina's warnings came in hushed calls, Victor's circling, asking about the dog. A car idled outside at odd hours, its engine a predatory purr, headlights slicing the dark like knives. Rune's instincts flared, hackles rising at a rustle in the alley, his nose twitching at scents carried on the wind, body language screaming vigilance. Greg's pulse quickened with each anomaly, a misplaced newspaper at his door scribbled with "Give up the mutt," the threat unspoken but palpable. They ventured out, once Rune on a leash, but shadows shifted, a figure ducking into doorways, chasing them with silent pursuit. Confrontation brewed in the air, thick as fog. Rune barked at a passing stranger whose gaze lingered too long, his watchfulness a mirror to Greg's paranoia. Internal dread built Greg's dreams, replayed the crash now with Victor's face, while Rune whimpered in sleep, paws twitching as if running from ghosts. Tina joined a walk, her presence a shield, but tension coiled tighter, a phone call from an unknown number, heavy breathing on the line. The threat materialized in the dead of night, the apartment door splintering under Victor's boot with a crack like thunder, his silhouette filling the frame like a harbinger of doom. "Time's up," he snarled, knife glinting in the moonlight, streaming through the shattered wood, eyes locked on Rune with murderous intent. Greg bolted upright from his chair, heart seizing as the confrontation erupted. Victor lunging forward, the blade slicing air inches from Rune's flank. Rune's growl turned to a ferocious bark, leaping to meet the assault, teeth sinking into Victor's arm, but the man's free hand swung a heavy pipe connecting with Greg's shoulder in a bone-jarring thud that sent him crumpling. Pain exploded, vision blurring, Greg's breath ragged as he gasped, "Run, boy," but Rune stood firm, body a barrier between them. Tina's scream pierced the chaos from the hallway where she'd followed, her phone dropping as she dialed for help, the situation spiraling into life-or-death frenzy. In the heart of the melee, time slowed, the knife arcing down toward Rune's exposed neck. Victor's face twisted in triumph. Greg's world narrowed to that glint of steel, his body screaming in protest, but adrenaline surging like a tidal wave, the choice crystallized, protect or perish. With a guttural roar, Greg lunged, shoving Rune aside and taking the blade's slash across his chest fabric, tearing hot blood blooming as pain ignited every nerve. "Not him!" Greg bellowed, his voice a raw command transforming fear into fierce resolve. Rune spared, whirled with renewed fury, clamping jaws on Victor's leg, dragging him down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The decision was visceral. Greg's action a shield for the dog who'd become his anchor, emotional resolution flooding as regrets dissolved, no more running from bonds from loss. Tina dove in, grabbing the fallen pipe and swinging it at Victor's back with a resounding crack, her cry for Elias echoing the catharsis. Victor staggered, knife clattering away, the tide turning in their unified stand. Rune's eyes met Greg's amid the chaos, a silent exchange of loyalty, the dog's protectiveness mirroring Greg's sacrifice. Tension shattered into action. Greg grappled Victor's arms, pinning him as sirens wailed, distant, but approaching the intruder's struggles, weakening under their combined force. Emotional waves crested Greg's tears, mixing with blood, whispering, "We're safe now," to Rune, who licked his hand, trust unbreakable. The hospital room hummed softly. Machines beeping in a rhythm that mimicked a hesitant heartbeat, the air sterile and cool against Greg's bandaged chest. He lay there, eyes half closed, the slash from Victor's knife, a throbbing line under gauze, each breath a deliberate pull against the void that lingered in his core. Rune curled at the bed's foot, allowed by a sympathetic nurse, his fur still matted from the fray, amber eyes watchful but weary. Tina hovered nearby, her hands folding a blanket with slow, methodical creases, her presence a quiet anchor in the aftermath. The crisis had passed, police lights fading into memory, Victor in cuffs, but the emotional decompression unfolded in pauses. Greg's fingers twitching toward Rune, the dog shifting closer with a soft huff. Minimal dialogue filled the space. A doctor murmured about stitches, but Greg nodded absently, his mind drifting through the haze of painkillers, the void not filled but softened. Rune's head rested on the mattress edge, his breath sinking with Greg's, a fragile return to safety etched in the slow drip of an IV. Back in the apartment, days blurred into a steady rhythm of recovery, the air warmer, now infused with the scent of fresh bandages and Rune's earthy musk. Greg moved with deliberate slowness, easing into his chair, his wound a dull ache that mirrored the fading bruises on Rune's flank, both healing in tandem, their behaviors interwoven like threads in a tapestry. Rune followed Greg's every step, paws patting softly on the floor, his amber eyes locking with Greg's in prolonged gazes that spoke volumes, a flicker of gratitude, a depth of loyalty rebuilt from shards. Small gestures accumulated, Greg's hand extending a treat, Rune accepting it with a gentle nudge of his muzzle. No hesitation now, the contact electric yet soothing. Tina visited, bringing soup that steamed with homely aromas, her smiles tentative but genuine as she watched Rune lean into Greg's leg, the dog's body relaxing in waves. Dawn painted the city streets in soft grays and golds, the snow a gentle dusting underfoot as Greg and Rune stepped out together, leash loose like an afterthought. Their strides synced effortlessly. Greg's measured gait, Rune's confident trot, side-by-side shadows merging on the pavement like intertwined fates. Rune's head lifted, high amber eyes scanning the horizon, without fear responding to Greg's soft call of his name with a perked ear and a glance that held volumes, trust absolute, the past's chains dissolved. Greg's hand brushed Rune's fur, mid-stride fingers lingering in the coarse warmth, breath sinking in quiet exhales that misted the air. The motion was intimate, a symphony of small releases, eyes meeting in fleeting assurance, hands steady, breaths deep and unhurried. Tina watched from the stoop, her wave a distant benediction, but the world narrowed to them, the crunch of snow, the faint wag of tail, an emotional breakthrough as profound as it was silent. Fear's echo faded, replaced by rebirth's hush, their walk a symbol of renewal, etched in every shared step.